We're halfway through Pride Month, as it has been claimed, as it has been annexed from the rest of us, and occupying space and time. That's something that conquerors do, and it's something that has been effectively done over many years by this political movement, this political insurgency. And I want to address that today. And I want to start off before getting into the details of the issue itself by just pointing out something about the current political moment where we find ourselves. I think a lot of people, they lament a time imagined at some point in the past where we all got along much better than we do today. A time when there was more bipartisanship and more reaching across the aisle and more seeking of compromise, and however you want to phrase it. And indeed, there may have been and probably was times in our past where more of that was possible, but there's a reason why it was possible and a reason why it is not today. And that is because compromise, by its very nature, can only occur when two sides are trying to achieve the same end. So, as a simple example of this, if you go to buy a car, and you as the buyer and the dealership as the seller are negotiating on the terms of the purchase of the vehicle, you have a common goal. The common goal is to complete the transaction. You want a car and they want to sell it. And so the compromise occurs within that context of trying to reach that common goal. If you decide at some point during the negotiations that you're no longer interested in buying a car or interested in buying their car, then there's no opportunity for compromise anymore because you've made a binary choice. You've decided, choosing whether you're going to buy it or not, that's a yes or no. There's no compromising between binaries. And in a similar sense, when we look at many given different issues that are discussed in public policy, a lot of the things that we're dealing with today, especially on the social front and the cultural arena, are binary considerations where you either are a yes or a no. You're either for it or you're against it. There is no gradation. There is no middle ground. You can't be on the fence. You can't be a little bit pregnant, right? And one of those issues is this issue of specifically transgenderism generally and transgendering kids in particular. This is a yes or no, black and white, for it or against it, red light, green light issue. There is no room for compromise. You're either for it or you're against it. And there is no coherent argument for some mishmash of the two, some in between. And so it's with that perspective that I approach this and every public policy topic. We first have to determine what our binary is. Where's the principle? Where's the yes and where's the no? And if both sides can agree on which side of the binary they're on, right, then we can compromise regarding how we're best going to serve the ends that binary suggests. So, for instance, if society suddenly became sane again, and we were all on the side that says, you know what, gender dysphoria is something that ought to be treated and ought to be effectively cured, that you ought to be able to accept who you actually are rather than have your dysphoria aggravated and enhanced and enabled in a way that leaves you incapable of living as you are. And of course, that's a position that is a given. It's baked into the cake of the transgender narrative, because if you weren't engaged in an aggravation of a disorder, then you wouldn't have to engage in medical interventions, poisoning, puberty blockers, surgery, disfiguring. You wouldn't have to reshape your body in order to approximate something that you're obviously not. The fact that you're not that thing is implicit in your chasing after a facsimile of it. All right. So this isn't an argument. Okay. This is just truth. It's just what's factually obvious. And if we could all agree on that, then we could start to compromise on how we're best going to serve people who suffer from this condition. How are we best going to come alongside them? How are we best going to love them? How are we best going to treat them in order to bring them to a place where their lives can be functional and self-actualizing and enabling and productive. Unfortunately, that's not the status quo. The status quo is you have one side that wants to do that, and another side that not only wants to provide a disservice to people who suffer from gender dysphoria by aggravating that condition and prescribing all sorts of unhealthy, unnecessary medical interventions in a futile attempt to chase a lie, but also want to impose this ideology that motivates all that onto our kids. And they're doing that at full breakneck speed. And they very much indicated that they want to take it further. They're going to take it as far as we will let them, which is true of any conqueror. Any conqueror will take it as far as you let them. All right. So what I want to specifically respond to here today is there was this Twitter thread from a while back, right about the time that this month started, and it happened in the wake of the release on Twitter by the Daily Wire of Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman? And as you no doubt recall, there was this weird back and forth that happened where the film was censored by Twitter for a period of time, about 24 hours. And then Elon Musk put the hammer down and some people resigned or were fired. And Elon retweeted the film, and hundreds of millions of people have viewed it at this point. And so quite a roller coaster ride there in terms of what happened with the Daily Wire and Matt Walsh. On a much more granular level, closer to home, there was a little bit of a roller coaster ride that happened between myself, Representative Lee Finke, who is the transgender representative who authored many of our most controversial bills this past session in 2023, and Representative Larry Kraft. And I want to walk you through that. So first, in response to Elon Musk retweeting and uncensoring the Daily Wire, Representative Lee Finke said, Musk understands that the future of Twitter depends on cradling its most fervent users, which at the moment happens to be a genocidal anti-trans movement. He is joining their effort. He is advocating prison for doctors, parents. We must proceed with open eyes. Happy Pride. And so I quote tweeted that because I took exception. Well, I took exception to virtually everything said in that tweet, but in particular, I took exception to this term genocidal anti-trans, which I regard to be a very malicious and deeply inappropriate and immoral use of emotional manipulation to imply something that is not happening and that no one is trying to do. So what I said was, to be clear, quote, genocidal anti-trans, unquote, means deferring to objective reality, upholding parental rights, opposing the poisoning and mutilation of children, maintaining single-sex spaces for dignity, comfort, safety, and fair competition. The absurd description of these positions as genocide should be disqualifying for any person, any position of influence in any institution throughout civilization. It's a characterization so dumb, so malevolent, so manipulative and bizarre that it should backfire upon its maker with all the scorn it's intended to inflict. And I think that's pretty well speaks for itself. And so that is what prompted the ultimate response, a 7-tweet Twitter thread from Representative Larry Kraft. And that's what I really want to walk through here today, because I think this is very instructive, and I hope you'll agree as we go through here. So Representative Kraft starts by saying, I'm really saddened by your comments, Walter. And, you know, that's always a nice way to start an interaction, because I suppose that's supposed to set the stage where I feel as though I feel defensive, or I feel as though I am somehow responsible for your sadness. I hate to say it, Representative Kraft, but I'm neither responsible for your feelings, nor do I feel any sense of responsibility to absolve you of them. It's unfortunate that you feel sad. It's unfortunate that my comments caused them, but my comments were necessary, and what I'm about to say is necessary as well. So continuing, Larry Kraft says, trans people exist and have a right to exist. I hope you'd agree with me on that. Okay, so I'm glad this is where it starts, with a comment this outlandish. This is what James Lindsay, I think correctly, calls a thought terminating cliche. Trans people exist. It's not a statement that actually says anything at all, but it does serve in very clever fashion a number of fallacious purposes. It serves as a straw man by presenting or implying the idea that my position and the positions of others who think like me, the positions of normal people who just want to go about living their lives in a world that acknowledges objective reality, that our objective is to end the existence of other people. And that's a pretty malicious implication. Like, you better be bringing the receipts if you're going to make or imply an accusation like that. It also serves as begging the question. That's another form of fallacy that it serves as. So what they mean, what Representative Larry Kraft, I believe I can confidently say, means by trans people exist, is he's skipping the point of debate and just establishing his conclusion and the conclusion of his side of the argument as an unassailable premise that we don't get to question. Okay, so what's at stake here is not whether or not people exist. Literally nobody is disputing the existence of any other person. What's at dispute is whether or not a man can be a woman or somehow become a woman or vice versa. That's what's at dispute. My position, the objective position, the demonstrated through our perception of reality at an early age position, is that men are men and women are women. Men are adult human males. Women are adult human females. And one cannot go from being one to being the other. There is no amount of surgery, no amount of hormone intervention, no amount of poisoning or mutilation, no amount of disfigurement that is going to take a man and transform him into a woman, or take a woman and transform her into a man. That's my position. And so this, and I have to laugh because it's so absurd that we've reached a point in modern society in the 21st century where this is the argument we have to have. Are men men? Are women women? It is this premise, this premise right here, trans people exist, what it means, what it actually means when they say it. The actual thing they're saying is that a man can in fact be a woman, and that a woman can in fact be a man. And those statements are quite possibly the most absurd statements ever uttered by anyone in all of human civilization, because they are so obviously untrue. And again, even the LGBT community and its quote unquote allies acknowledge this through what they prescribe in the form of quote unquote affirmation. How do you affirm a transgender person? Well, you stick them full of hormones and cut off pieces of their arm and try to fashion it into a facsimile of genitalia, or you cut off their genitalia altogether and leave a gaping hole in their body and then prevent their body from healing itself, and otherwise disfigure and interfere with the natural development of a human being. That's how you affirm a person's gender identity. Well, maybe that's not their actual identity then. Maybe if you have to engage in interventions in physical reality in order to disrupt the biological processes of the individual in question, you have to deny them the capacity to be able to reproduce. You have to sterilize them. You have to keep them from ever being able to have sexual function ever again. You have to have surgery, have like a mastectomy or hysterectomy. I mean, the things that we're talking about here are deeply invasive and irreversible interventions that leave a person permanently, physically, emotionally, and spiritually scarred. Okay? You wouldn't have to do that if your underlying claim was true. If a man could become a woman, we would be able to look and say, but there's a woman now. Nobody would question it because you'd be able to see that's a woman. The fact that there's any question about it whatsoever, it's just, whew. All right. So I think I've unpacked that enough. I spent a lot of time on that first sentence because that's really the root of all of this. And again, going back to what I said earlier, this is one of those areas where it's a binary. There's no room for compromise here. You either believe that a man can somehow be a woman or you don't. And that position defines everything that comes after in terms of this argument. And so let's see how that plays out here in this Twitter thread. Larry Kraft goes on to say, if they have a right to exist, then shouldn't trans people be able to access health care that improves their health? Well, indeed, they should, Representative Kraft. The question is, do those procedures that I described earlier, do medical interventions such as injecting hormones that aren't naturally produced by your body or naturally produced by a normal, healthy person of that sex, is that a quote unquote medical care that is going to improve the health of the person? Is mutilating somebody, engaging in surgery, unnecessary mastectomy, unnecessary hysterectomy, are these procedures that are actually improving people's health? When you deny somebody their sexual function, their ability to reproduce, you sterilize them, how is that improving their health exactly? And the argument that you will get in response to that is, well, you are aligning their physical expression or their physical body with their quote unquote gender expression, and therefore somehow providing a kind of a psychological relief. A person who believes, a man who believes he is a woman, can be quote more comfortable in their skin because you've taken these actions to make them physically approximate a woman, even though they actually aren't one. And I would argue that that's incredibly abusive. And I don't think my argument requires a lot of substantiation. I mean, you're talking about medically unnecessary physical interventions that are irreversible and leave people with physical dysfunctions for the rest of their life, in order to make them feel comfortable. Really? Maybe we should work on ways for them to feel comfortable being what they are. Maybe that's the way to actually help somebody who's suffering from this condition of gender dysphoria, is to work with them therapeutically through treatment, through care, in order to make them comfortable or help them become comfortable with who they actually are, rather than aggravating the dysfunction and abusing it, really. I mean, when you come to the medical establishment, because one of the things that we hear all the time now is, oh, doctors say this is okay, and the medical associations say this is okay, and this is wonderful, and it's great, and there's all these hospitals that want to do it. Well, yeah, they're all getting paid. It's amazing how the profit motive is apparently only a thing when it comes to giant corporations or country club, people in Edina and Minnetonka, right? Like those are the only people who are motivated by profit. Doctors aren't, nurses aren't, hospitals aren't, nonprofits aren't. Everybody working for a nonprofit's getting paid. They're not doing it for free. Okay. Everyone is subject to economic incentives, and there's tremendous economic incentive in this industry that has grown up around selling people the lie that they're something that they're not. And it's abusive because you're taking folks who are suffering from a condition where they're predisposed to agree with you and to agree with the course of treatment that you're prescribing, which is going to line your pockets and leave them without the ability to have children. That's pretty evil. And in a sane society, we would not allow that. Just like we wouldn't allow a doctor to prescribe and perform a lobotomy for no reason whatsoever. So yes, Larry Kraft, we should in fact allow trans people to access healthcare that improves their health. The problem is we're not doing that. That's the problem. We're not doing that. Kraft continues, wanting to transition doesn't only happen in adulthood. There are parents with trans kids that are experiencing depression and severe anxiety, harming their mental and physical health. They need appropriate health care, which is gender affirming care. And again, I agree they need appropriate health care. What I don't agree with is that appropriate health care involves mutilation, poisoning, and even psychological therapy and treatment that aggravates their gender dysphoria and leads them to the belief or furthers their belief that they are something that they obviously physically are not. The appropriate way to treat this condition is to foster an acceptance of who you actually are. And, you would think that that would be the natural, healthy, obvious choice. This whole the use of the word affirmation. If you want to affirm somebody's identity, then you look to who and what they are and you affirm that. You don't affirm a lie. You don't affirm something that isn't true. And again, this all goes back to the root premise of, can a man be a woman? Can a woman be a man? And that's a yes or no premise. And where you fall on that is going to determine where you fall on all of this. I don't present those as competing opinions. One of those ideas is correct, and the other idea is wrong. And the idea that's correct is the one that is backed up by objective reality. Who are we as politicians, Larry Kraft goes on to say, to get between parents, kids, and their doctors in making decisions about healthcare? Would we tell a parent they can't treat a kid's diabetes, severe depression, cancer? And this is pretty rich coming from an incumbent Democrat Minnesota legislator who I believe served through the pandemic. So we just experienced multiple years of one man, Governor Tim Walz, unilaterally seizing control of the lives of 6 million Minnesotans, and very specifically coming between parents, their children, their teachers, their everything, their businesses, their workplace, their employer, and telling us what we can and can't do. So this premise that, who are we to say, not to mention the fact that we just came out of a 2023 legislative session that was nothing but the Democrats intervening and telling us what we can and cannot do, banning energy production, redistributing our money, seizing our property to give it to other people based upon their political constituencies. So please don't suddenly play the libertarian on me and pretend as though, you're somebody who thinks we shouldn't come between people and their medical decisions. The healthcare system could be a heck of a lot freer than it currently is. And we would all be better off for it, but you're not willing to do that because, as it turns out, there's all sorts of things. In fact, one of the bills that was passed this year was a ban on so-called conversion therapy, which is very specifically exactly what you're saying we shouldn't do. I mean, let's go back to what you just said. Who are we as politicians to get between parents, kids, their doctors in making decisions about healthcare? Well, Larry Kraft, I'm pretty sure you voted for the conversion therapy ban, which does exactly that. So please don't come at me from this angle because you obviously don't believe what you're saying. And in point of fact, there are all sorts of justifications for why we would intervene in so-called healthcare treatment and transactions of all kinds. That's what our entire regulatory apparatus exists for. That's why we have safety regulations and employment law and healthcare regulations, any number of rules on the books. And there's literally books of them stacked up everywhere we go in that Capitol when we're down there serving. So this is kind of silly, I hate to say it, Representative Kraft, to present the idea that, who are we to get involved? When, number one, you get involved in literally everything. I mean, your entire party platform and your agenda is to get involved in the minutia of all of our lives, first of all. And secondarily, there are places where that's appropriate. I mean, you guys do it in a lot of places where it's not appropriate. But when it comes down to fraud, like somebody is offering a product or service which is actually harmful, and they're taking advantage of somebody's lack of capacity in order to profit off of that lack of capacity, that's called fraud. And we properly should intervene in that. And that's our job as politicians, as elected officials, as government, to protect people's rights, to protect them from being taken advantage of, to protect them from being defrauded and being abused by criminals. If you're not here to do that, then I don't know what you're here for. So moving on. Your comments about gender-affirming care are inaccurate and inflammatory. Mutilation? Come on. The standard of care for people under 18 does not include surgery. Look it up. Okay. Well, I mean, look, as convincing as your argument there, come on, as convincing as that is, I don't think I can accept it. Yes, it's mutilation. What else do you call cutting pieces off of somebody's arm in order to fashion it into a facsimile of a penis? That's mutilation. Okay. Cutting off a healthy teenage girl's breasts. That's mutilation. Um, there's just no other way to describe it. That's exactly what it is. And it's, it's beyond argument. That is what it is. And I presented the definition on the House floor. I could do it here again. I'm not going to take the time. You either accept this or you don't. Obviously you don't. But you haven't presented a case, right? The natural, biological, objective case is that this is mutilation. You're taking healthy body parts and you are cutting them off. You are defacing them. You are removing their natural function for no legitimate reason whatsoever. That's mutilation. And this point that the standard of care for people under 18 does not include surgery, fantastic. Then you should have no problem banning it. And I look forward to you signing on to legislation that will ban surgery for minors for reasons of quote unquote gender affirmation. I'm sure you'll be number 2 on the bill. And then he continues saying, and poisoning, if you're referring to puberty blocker medication, it has been used by pediatricians for decades, and not just on kids wanting to transition. These are prescribed meds, and as with any prescriptions, should be decisions for a kid, parents, and their doctor. Okay. So this, again, kind of similar to the point about how, who are we as politicians to intervene in transactions and medical care, when in point of fact, that's the entire purpose for which the government exists. And there's literally volumes of books dictating exactly the degree to which we interfere in all of that. Similar to that, how he's just suddenly pretending that that's not something that we do. This is another example of obfuscation that's pretty embarrassing once you unpack it. And so, yes, there are tons of medical treatments and medicines and drugs that get used for various reasons in medicine. I myself am a diabetic. I have prescriptions. My prescriptions come to me from a doctor in particular dosages, and then they are dispensed at a pharmacy, and I take them according to the instructions. All right. Now, anywhere along that line, if there was to be some sort of abuse, if, for instance, the doctor were to inappropriately and knowingly prescribe the wrong dosage or the wrong medication, if they prescribed a medication for me that does not in fact treat diabetes or potentially could make it worse, that would be a problem. And as government, we would properly intervene in that. If the pharmacy somehow engaged in a similar fraud or neglect or malicious conduct, we would go after them. If I, as the consumer, were trying to defraud the medical system or claim that I have a condition that I don't in order to, I was a pill seeker or something, I'm trying to get drugs for illegitimate recreational reasons, or for even more nefarious reasons. Maybe I'm trying to poison somebody or something, right? Then that would be inappropriate and you would interfere on my end of that transaction. So we do this all the time for good reasons. We come between doctors and patients and pharmacies and end users for engaging in conduct which is inappropriate, immoral, harmful, and unhealthy. And the same applies here. Yes, there are puberty blockers that exist and have been used for years. Yes, there are, in fact, legitimate medically necessary reasons why those hormones and chemicals may, in fact, be used. Trying to affirm a lie is not one of those reasons. And when you take a medicine and you use it for a purpose that is not healthy, that is an abuse, that is an indictment, it is not an argument. So please do better, Representative Kraft. All right. And so lastly, why are you seeming to encourage people to go after our colleague, verbally at least? Have you ever spent any time with a trans person to really understand how they made their decision to transition or what a trans kid has gone through in life? Okay. So to the first point here of why do I seem to be encouraging people to go after our colleague? And he's, of course, referring to Representative Lee Finke there. I'm not. I don't think you can point to a single statement that I've made where I've said, sick 'em, right? Like, go after Representative Lee Finke. That is, I've never said anything like that. I've never implied that you should do anything like that. And it's interesting that you put in the qualifier there verbally, and I'm glad you did, that you're not implying that I'm somehow advocating for violence, because I most certainly am not. But if the consequence of public discourse is that people have something to say to you as an elected representative in response, so what? That's your job. Are you kidding me? So I'm supposed to take into consideration as I argue this extraordinarily impactful public policy, whether or not any of my colleagues might be personally inconvenienced by the public responding. Give me a break. If you don't want people to come after you verbally, if you don't want people in your DMs, on your Twitter feed, in your email inbox, coming after you for what you say, then this isn't the job for you. This isn't the position for you. You don't have the Constitution for it. If that's how you feel, that you shouldn't have to be confronted by that, number one. And number two, maybe think about the content and impact of the things that you're prescribing. So, for instance, when you author a bill, as Representative Lee Finke did, which has the effect of canceling the parental rights of citizens of the United States who live outside the state of Minnesota, so that if their child is transported, brought here, somehow finds their way under their own reconnaissance to the state of Minnesota for the purpose of so-called gender-affirming care, that their parent back in whatever state they came from no longer has any custodial rights to them. That's a consequence of a bill that was authored, passed, and signed into law, authored by Lee Finke. Now, doing that, taking people's rights away, coming after their kids, that's something that might provoke a reaction, right? You might have to take a few phone calls on that one. You might see a few mean tweets as a result of doing that. And I guess I don't care that you're enduring that. In fact, you should endure that. Absolutely. You're going after people's rights. You're going after their kids. You're telling people this movement, this perverse political insurgent movement, literally tells parents that their children are dead, that your son is dead, and his name is Melissa now, right? Your daughter is dead, or that they never existed. That is the type of audacity, and I think it's evil, that should and will rationally provoke a reaction. So if you don't want to endure that reaction, don't say such deeply immoral, and don't advocate for and pursue and facilitate such harmful, unhealthy, deeply immoral, evil things. And then you won't have to deal with the consequences. So I guess that's where I'm at on that. Oh, and then to the point of, have I spent any time with a trans person to really understand how they made their decision, or a trans kid, and what they've gone through in life? The short answer to that is yes, I have. I guess my question in response to that is, what's your point? Like, what is that? How does that change anything at all? Yes, I understand that suffering from gender dysphoria is difficult. That is not an argument for aggravating that condition and mutilating and poisoning and kidnapping kids from their parents out of state. Like, that's not an argument for any of this stuff. It's an argument for treatment that gets them to accept who they are, that gets them to accept objective reality and become comfortable in their skin as it is, unmutilated, unadulterated. That's what it's an argument for. It's certainly not an argument for adulterating bodies, for mutilation, for poisoning, for taking kids from their parents, for telling their parents that their kid is dead, that their son is dead, that their daughter is dead. It's not a justification for any of that. So yes, I've heard the personal experiences and the personal testimonies. Yes, it hits close to home. Absolutely. And is the cause and source of awkwardness. But to remain silent in the face of that, or to concede a point that I know to be false in order to alleviate the awkwardness, would be deeply, it'd be a deep expression of cowardice. And I'm not willing to do that. So. Lastly, Larry Kraft says, this isn't new. Trans people have existed throughout human history. It doesn't hurt anyone to let trans people live their lives openly and to pursue happiness. I'd argue it enriches society when more of us can live authentically without fear and without persecution. Okay. So, again, this is interesting, coming as it does from a representative in a political party, which has no desire whatsoever to allow me to live authentically without fear and without persecution. In fact, and going back to the previous point regarding, people coming after Representative Lee Finke, do you think it's all sunshine and roses on my end of this conversation? I don't have mean tweets. I don't have people in my DMs. I don't have some rough emails to read in my inbox. We all get that as a consequence of taking positions on matters of important public policy that actually affect people's lives. But specific to this point of living authentically without fear and persecution, that's not what you prescribe for those of us who hold my position. The people who hold my position, and me personally, the hope that the LGBT political insurgent movement has is that I don't get to feed my children. That's what they want for me. They want me to lose my livelihood. They want me to lose the ability to provide for my family. That's what they feel is the just penalty for disagreeing with them. Okay. So I guess I don't want to hear about your desire for people to live authentically without fear and persecution, because your movement, the movement that you're an ally of and supporting, is the movement that is holding fear and persecution up as a threat against the rest of us. And so, we're past the point here of the live and let live carrot having its intended effect, because we know it's a lie. We bought that lie back in 2012, right? We bought that lie back when the argument was just let people just want to live their lives, and people just want to love who they love and be left alone and have the same tax benefits and whatnot as everyone else. We accepted that argument then. We believed it. We took it in good faith, but it wasn't offered in good faith. What's happening now, was the plan all along, and we see that now. We see that we're being conquered, that we're being displaced, and that your goal for us is not for us to be able to live authentically, but for us to renounce our God, to renounce our beliefs, our most fundamental beliefs, and even our secular perception of reality itself. We are meant to renounce that in order to affirm you. And my answer to that is, and will continue to be until my dying breath, no. Good talk. Hey, if you appreciate this, if you've watched all the way to this point and you appreciate it, then hey, enable me to continue having these types of conversations and being able to make these kinds of stands and statements by going to hudsonformn.com and considering a contribution. Signing up for something as small as $1, $5, $10 recurring every month is extremely helpful. If you can give a one-time gift bigger than that, fantastic. We do have PCR in this state, political contribution refund. So if you are a Minnesotan and you contribute up to, I believe it is $100 per couple, you can get that money back, and I'll make sure you get the means to do so if you contribute. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your June, and have a good day.